Hi friends, Miss Liz here. So today we are going to do a classic chocolate cocoa bomb. These are so really easy to do once you learn the steps, and hopefully you'll enjoy this. So in the classroom, you should have access to the recipe for the basic cocoa mix, which is what I have here. And you're just gonna mix those ingredients, the brown sugar, the white sugar, the cocoa powder, and the salt. Mix them until they're nice and smooth. If you come across any large clumps, try to break those up because we don't want any large sugar clumps in there, but a fairly nice, soft powder. It does look pretty dark. That's okay, it's very, very rich. All right, so once you have that mixed up, we're gonna make our shells. And depending on what kind of chocolate you're using is how hard it is to get the chocolate nice and smooth and melted. I have found almond bark melts the easiest, but candy melts tend to set up a little bit more sturdy. So you can kind of give and take, and also depending what's available in your area. Almond bark is a lot easier to find in my area, which is what I'm using today. So to start with, don't melt all of your chocolate at once, because then you're just gonna have to keep remelting that large bowl. What I recommend is starting with about 6 ounces of chocolate. So if you're doing a brick of almond bark, that's about 3 of these squares. If you're doing chocolate melts, wafers or pieces, I would do about 3/4 of a cup. That should give you about 6 ounces. Melt that until it's nice and smooth. So what I've done here is I've put it in for about 30 seconds, stirred it, put it in for another 30 seconds, stirred it. And you can see I still have some fairly large pieces in there, so I'm gonna put it back in for another about 30 seconds. Just to make sure it's nice and smooth. Now, it's important when you're melting chocolate not to overheat the chocolate, because if you scorch it, if you burn it in a certain spot, if it gets a hot spot and it burns, it becomes very clumpy, you can't get it smooth, it won't taste right. So be very, very careful not to overheat your chocolate, okay? So just about 30-second intervals is what I recommend to make sure that we can stir it and it doesn't develop any hot spots. So nice and smooth. We want a nice, smooth, runny texture where it just kind of pours off of the spoon. Now, if it is steaming hot, there's a lot of heat coming off of it, then stir it for a little bit so that it can cool just a little bit more. If you still have a few lumps after you've done about 1.5 minutes total, 3 30-second intervals, if you still have a few small lumps, try just stirring, and the hot melted chocolate should continue to melt the rest of those pieces of chocolate that are in your bowl, instead of continuing to microwave it and making our chocolate even hotter. Okay? So once I have it nice and smooth, when we make these shells, it's really important to make sure that we coat the entire inside and that we get all the way to this top rim. If we don't get a good layer around that top rim, that's where you're more than likely going to crack your shell when you go to put it together or when you go to take it out of the mold. So making sure we get it all the way up to that top rim, all the way around, is the main goal of the first coat. We're gonna do 2 coats here. So what we're gonna do is you're gonna take your spoon, take the bottom of your spoon, the back of your spoon where it's curved, dip that in chocolate, and then you're just gonna wipe the back of the spoon off on the rim. So you're kind of wiping chocolate off into it. And then again, use the back of your spoon and push that chocolate around the sides. Now, as you do that, make sure that you're covering any holes, and anywhere where it's not all the way up to that top rim edge, make sure you're really pushing that around. Look at it from different angles to make sure that you're not missing any spots. We're getting it nice and coated all the way around. No holes. Nice even coat. Okay. If you need to dip a little bit more chocolate out of your bowl, you can definitely do that. But the first coat does not need to be very thick. If you make the first coat too thick, it will puddle. All of the extra chocolate that you don't need is going to create a puddle in the bottom. And then you've just used more chocolate in that one bomb than you needed to. So we just want to make sure we get a nice even coat all the way up to the top rim. Doesn't have to be super thick, like I said, because we are gonna do a second coat. So just nice and covered all the way around. And we're gonna repeat that process for all of these wells. Okay, so dipping, using the back of the spoon to spread it around, making sure we cover all the way up to that top rim, nice and even, nice and well coated, all the way up to that top edge. Okay, so again, and it doesn't have to be really, really thick. Make sure you look at it from all angles. You can kind of see right there on the edge, I missed a little spot, so make sure that you're getting it all the way around, getting a good look at it. Okay, and just continue to do that until your entire shell mold is full. And then you're gonna take that and pop it into your freezer and let it set up for a few minutes so that those chocolate shells get nice and firm, and then we'll do the second coat. Okay, so here I've got my first coat. It's nice and set up. Gets kind of like a hard finish. If it's sticky at all, then make sure you put it back in until it's nice and set up. So we're gonna do the same thing that we did before, but here's a little tip. Your second coat doesn't need to be super thick. Find the areas that need more chocolate. So depending on the kind of mold you have, what I like to do is I'll hold it up and look at it from the bottom, and you can see anywhere where there's light that shows through, that's a spot where the chocolate is too thin and you need another coat. So if you hold it up and look at it from the bottom, you should be able to see where the places are that it's not quite thick enough. So for the second coat, the first thing you're gonna do is focus on that side and that top rim again. So we're gonna take the back of the spoon, run it around the edge, make sure we concentrate on getting a good coat on the top rim, all the way around. And then hold it up to the light and see if that one has any spots that aren't quite thick enough. That one actually looks okay on the bottom. So I'm going to move on to the next one. Focus on the side and the top rim. Get it all spread out. Got it from the bottom. I've got a little spot right in the side here where there's a little bit of light, so I'm going to just patch that little hole. Make sure it's nice and coated, okay? And we continue to do that until you've got all of them done with the second coat. Pop it back into your freezer, and then we'll pull it out and we'll start the assembly process. While they're setting up from their second coat, you can get a microwave safe plate out of your cabinet, not plastic, something that will retain a little bit of heat. So like a Corelle plate, some kind of microwave safe ceramic, something like that, that you can use in the microwave to get a little bit warm. And we're gonna use that to seal the edges of our Cocoa Bomb. You're also gonna want either a piping bag or a Ziploc bag, and then a little bit more of your melted chocolate so that we can use for our drizzle and to help seal and add our sprinkles, okay? So finish your second coat, and then we're gonna move on to the assembly process. All right, friends. So before we start our assembly process, I'm gonna give you some tips about getting your shells out of your mold. So the first thing I recommend, if you have a silicone mold, is to kind of give it a little bit of a stretch. So kind of pull the silicone to loosen the edges. And then what you're gonna do, and don't try to pull the chocolate out, peel the silicone off of the shells. Kind of like you're peeling the skin off of an orange. Peel the silicone away instead of trying to pull the chocolate out. That way you're not applying so much pressure to your shell. All of the pressure is being applied to removing the silicone. And it should pop out fairly easily. All right, so we've got a nice smooth shell on the bottom. It doesn't matter if it looks like a hot mess on the inside because nobody's gonna see the inside of your Cocoa Bomb. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna warm your plate in the microwave about 30 seconds until it's nice and warm in the center. You can see I have some melted chocolate in the middle of mine because I've already done some. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take one of these little shells, and I'm gonna turn it upside down on my plate and just spin it a couple times. until the edges get kind of gooey. They get a little bit melted. Now don't leave it on your plate too long or you're gonna shrink your shell down and you're not gonna have much of a shell left. So once I've got some nice gooey edges, I'm gonna take 2 tablespoons of that mix, the recipe posted in the classroom, this mix we made. 2 tablespoons. That's my bottom. And then I'm gonna take a top, so another half shell, and I'm gonna do that same thing. I'm gonna spin it around on the plate to get the edge nice and gooey. And then you have 2 options. You can either put your marshmallows into the lid and kind of flip it over, or you can set the marshmallows in a pile on top of your mix and then just set the lid down. I like to kind of dump the marshmallows over so I can make sure that I have the amount of marshmallows that are gonna fit in that bomb. So once I flipped it over, I'm gonna make sure that my edges line up. There's a little bit of extra gooey chocolate. I'm just gonna use my finger to kind of smooth around that seam, any of that chocolate that kind of squirts out. And then you can either leave it like this with just a plain seam, or you can roll it in some sprinkles to make them stick to that melted chocolate on the seam. You can kind of roll it around on the seam in some sprinkles, like that, okay? So that's the first way you can seal it, just using that hot plate, okay? Just like that. Now the other way you can do it is if you take a Ziploc bag or a piping bag and take a little bit of your melted chocolate, put that down into your Ziploc bag. You can also, if you're gonna do quite a bit of chocolate in your bag, you can put the bag over a cup and it'll hold it for you, and then you don't have to try to hold the bag while you're scooping chocolate into it. That's what I do for piping frosting. But so put some of that chocolate into a Ziploc bag. And then you're gonna take some scissors and you're gonna cut off the very, very tip, like just the very, very end of that bag. Grab my scissors really quick. There we go. And then that's ready to use. So I'm gonna show you the other way you can seal these. You can take your shell, put it upside down on the plate to get the edge just a little bit soft. This also helps to kind of flatten out the rim so it's a nice smooth finish. And then 2 tablespoons of mix. And then I'm going to show you the other way where I'm just going to make a little pile of marshmallows and then set the lid on top of it. Like that. Set that down. Get a top here. Kind of spin it around so it's nice and smooth. Set the top down. Make sure that my edges all line up nicely. Press the top down like that. And then what I can do is take my little Ziploc of chocolate and just pipe a line of chocolate right there on that seam. This is going to help reinforce that seam to make sure that the bomb stays closed. And it also gives you a little bit more chocolate for those sprinkles to stick to. So I usually take my finger and just kind of flatten out that seam. And then you can roll it in the sprinkles to get them to stick to the seam, just like that, okay? Now, if you don't want to deal with the hot plate, you can definitely skip that and just do the method with your piping bag of chocolate. The only thing about that is then your edges aren't quite as smooth, and so you have a little bit of a jagged finish that you kind of have to work with. But you can definitely skip the plate if you don't want to do that and you aren't worried about those jagged edges, okay? Now to give it just a simple finish on the top, we can take our piping bag and just do a very basic back and forth zigzag pattern across the top with a drizzle. Just like that, okay? And then if you want, you can add some extra sprinkles to the top or a different kind of sprinkle. And then I usually also set them down in a cupcake liner. So here's a finished one, just like that. So that's a basic cocoa bomb. And then next week we'll talk about making a different flavor and how to add some extra kinds of designs. All right, good luck with your bombs. Hope they turn out great, and I'll see you next time.